Hello and welcome to Get On Beat Rhythm Game Retrospective, the show that profiles those long forgotten rhythm games that you may have heard about in passing, or possibly even played at some point. Whether it was fondly remembered, deservedly forgotten, or somewhere in between, let's do a bit of a delve into the depths of rhythm gaming's past and see what pops up. Today, I'm going to be covering...
Gitaroo.
That's right, it's Gitaroo Man, a quirky Japanese music game that probably never should have seen an English release, let alone see both PAL and NTSC versions coming out. These released on June 21st, 2001 in Japan, Feb 18th, 2002 in the US, and finally June 21st, 2002 in Europe. In addition, there was also a Japanese-only release called Gitaroo Man 1, which was basically a trial of the game featuring only a demo version of the second stage and a mini-game not available in the standard edition, as well as some unique cinematics. Now, what else was coming out around the same time in each territory? On the rhythm gaming front, Japan got DDR Extra Mix for the PS1, the US got nothing, and while not Europe specific, on June 19th, 2002, Britney's Dance Beat debuted to a rousing success. A game revered and held in such high esteem that it doesn't even have its own Wikipedia page. Outside of rhythm gaming, June 2001 was the 10th anniversary of Sonic the Hedgehog. So yeah, about 7 years since the last decent Sonic game. Gitaroo Man was developed by Inus, who prior to this worked on Beatmania Da and Poppin' Music Da. I actually had no idea Konami outsourced development for those, let alone that Poppin' Da was a thing that existed. Who knows, maybe I'll cover those in a later episode. I mentioned previously that this game probably never should have seen an English release, and the reason for that is because it is rather quirky and it's very Japanese. Maybe not to the point of something like Mr. Mosquito, which somehow also saw an English release, but still odd enough to be sort of surprising, not to mention that rhythm gaming wasn't exactly at its zenith yet, so it makes even less sense. In Gitaroo Man, you play as U1, a bit of a wet blanket who is constantly bullied by his peers and ignored by the girl of his dreams, Pico. U1's dog, Puma, teaches him to play the guitar in the practice mode of the game, after which U1 finds himself attacked by a devil-like creature called Pampius. Puma then transforms and gives him the Gitaroo, after which he transforms into the Gitaroo Man. After this, Earth gets invaded by aliens called Flying O's who are looking for U1's Gitaroo. U1 defeats them and Puma then takes U1 back to planet Gitaroo in a quest to liberate the 8 legendary Gitaroos from the Gravillian Empire who have taken over their planet. Eventually he finds the Gitaroos, transforms into the true form of the Gitaroo Man, overcomes the evil Prince Zoe, and finds his own self-confidence in the process. Now granted, story in a music game is typically a bit of an oversight, but it and the characters within actually play a fairly big part in Gitaroo Man and are largely responsible for its irreverent charm and its lovable personality. Sure, the story is simplistic and silly, but it works well within the confines of a rhythm game. The design style of the game and its cast is unique. It's sort of anime-esque, but it's also its own thing too, with a semi-hand-drawn art style that translates decently to the basic level of 3D that the game presents. It still looks like a PS2 game of course, but because of the style the artists were going for, it's aged quite well. Pretty much any game that was going for a realistic image at the time Gitaroo Man came out, they've not really aged so well. That said, FF10 came out about a month after Gitaroo Man, and that still holds up okay. Anyways, enough about graphics and story. This is a rhythm game, so let's talk about the most important aspects, which is basically everything else. The game has 10 stages. The typical structure of each stage is that you go through 3 phases, and actually, I'll just let the dog explain it.
A tune is usually made up of the charge, battle, and final phases. First, the charge. The charge is the phase where you gain power. The better you play, the more power goes into the power gauge. If your timing's off, or if the trace line goes out of the blue zone, you won't gain power. You've got a battle to fight, so charge up all the power you can. Next, the battle. In the battle phase, there's the attack mode and the guard mode. You alternate between them. In attack mode, lay down the hottest riffs you can. The better you play, the more damage your opponent takes. Mess up, and you're the one who takes damage. In guard mode, the key is to dodge your opponent's attacks. The controls work a little differently in guard mode. These guard marks move in from 4 directions. As they reach the center, press the corresponding button. If you guard successfully, your damage is 0. If you don't, you lose power.
Got it? Each stage pits you against an opponent, sort of like a fighting game almost. In fact, when you lose a stage, the enemy taunts you, just like in Street Fighter 2. You'll see these often, especially on Masters mode, but more on that later. As Puma said, you use the face buttons exclusively during guard mode, and the left analog stick plus one of the face buttons all other times. Yeah, it looks like you should be pressing circle, but no, any one of the face buttons will do. This works okay. Honestly, the control scheme is probably the worst part of the game. Even though the game sort of snaps to the trace line if you're in the vicinity of it, it's still so easy to lose your position with the analog stick. It gets easier with practice, but it can still be irritating from time to time. Not to mention that transitioning from the guard sections to the attack sections and vice versa can be quite difficult. When the guard sections start getting hectic, you almost want to switch to 2 hands to keep up. Now, this can work, but then you often can't get back to the analog stick position quick enough for the transition. The game was certainly begging for a custom controller to be made for it when it came out. Considering that was in 2001, it's a super niche game and also quite a short one at that. If a controller hasn't come out for it now, I don't think it ever will. That said, something like the Project Diva Hori controller could work quite well. There's probably a few others out there that might work decently too. So yeah, as I mentioned, the game is fairly short. It's only 10 songs and you could easily finish the game in under an hour. But thankfully, the songs are mostly great, so let's do a bit of a quick rundown. As you can see, there's a wide variety when it comes to genres. And these are full-length songs for the most part too, the longest song being 4 minutes and 51 seconds. The ninth stage is longer, but it is technically 2 songs. If you've played this before, and I assume most people watching this probably have, you'll likely remember Fly Into Your Heart, Born to Be Bone, and the legendary theme quite fondly, and rightfully so. They're brilliant songs and definitely the highlights of the game. I'm particularly fond of the acoustic version of the legendary theme. The song is great, and the stage that goes with it is really sweet and perfectly executed. It might also be the only example of a romantic theme in a rhythm game that I can think of. Of course, they're not all hits. The Ben K songs are pretty forgettable, as is B-Jam Blues. But then again, music tastes are all pretty subjective. I personally think Tainted Lovers is great, but as far as I know, that's never gotten any recognition, so yeah, your mileage may vary a bit when it comes to the music. The difficulty, unfortunately, is sort of a mess in terms of the stage progression. As a first-time player with some experience in rhythm games, you likely won't have too much trouble up until you hit stage 7 with the Sandbone Trio. This is where the difficulty spikes quite substantially, especially coming from the stage before, which is quite easy. The guard sections become complex, it becomes rather difficult to keep up with the trace line, and juggling the 2 modes starts to become a fair bit of a challenge. This continues pretty much for the remaining stages, with Tainted Lovers probably being the hardest of the bunch. The timing of this game in general is quite strict as well. Getting greats requires a fair bit of precision. However, this is nothing compared to Masters Mode, which is unlocked upon completion of the game. You get to play through everything again, but this time the songs are significantly harder. The timing is not affected, but you basically have to press the attack button for every note that U1 plays. Each note requires some sort of bending, and the guard mode is much more frantic. This is where the replay value in the game is, but it's also the point where you'll be begging for that custom controller. It can get really difficult, even for rhythm game veterans. You'll definitely fail songs fairly often, and this is where some of the story aspects of the game can start to interfere with proceedings. Unfortunately, the cutscenes aren't skippable, and seeing the same one over and over again starts to get tedious pretty quick, especially on the 9th stage, which has one that's well over a minute long. Aside from that though, the difficulty is welcome. The game needed a mode like this to keep you playing. There's not too much else to the game once you get through Masters Mode. Obviously, you can replay songs to improve your scores, which is the main drive for most obsessive rhythm gamers anyways, and with the timing being as strict as it is, it can take a fair bit of effort to continuously improve. There's also a multiplayer mode. Not all songs are available in this, but it basically plays like a battle mode. It's quite fun, and you can play with up to 4 players using a multi-tap. The fact that there are only 10 songs and some of them aren't available in this mode sort of sucks. It really hurts the replayability factor quite a bit. In addition, there's unlockables and such, but you'll get the vast majority of these on your first playthrough. There's some cute character biographies that are pretty nifty, but that's about it. Gitaroo Man garnered a fair bit of praise when it was released, with scores hovering around the 8 to 9 mark. Game Informer called it the best rhythm game ever released. Now, that may be going a bit far, though I guess Britney's Dance Beat hadn't come out yet at that stage, so maybe it was accurate at the time. Who knows, I can't think of any other rhythm game franchises that kicked off before February 2002 that could be considered one of the greatest of all time. I've no idea how many units this sold in various territories. I did a fair bit of research, but all that came up were articles mentioning low sales, as well as dubious positions on clickbaity charts with titles like Top 10 Best Video Games That No One Bought. So one can assume that it didn't do particularly well. The sad part is that realistically, Britney's Dance Beat probably outsold it quite effortlessly. That said, it did get re-released on the PSP in 2006 as Gitaroo Man Lives, which contained additional difficulty options, an English version of Fly Into Your Heart, and a duet mode which had 2 new songs titled Metal Header and Total Passion. So it was good to see some new life breathed into it. Inus also went on to develop a number of fairly significant games in the rhythm genre, such as the official Osu games, and Elite Beat Agents. They also developed some less significant ones, such as Lips, which is sort of a poor man's SingStar, and Black Eyed Peas Experience. Can't wait to get to that one. In 2017, Ines teamed with Parappa the Rapper devs Nana on Shah to release a new rhythm game with the working title of Project Rap Rabbit. This was being pitched as a revival of story-based rhythm games, featuring rap battle gameplay mixed with Japanese culture. A Kickstarter was launched on May 15th of that year, but sadly it didn't even reach a quarter of its goal. There was some criticism directed at the campaign due to a lack of actual gameplay footage, and I assume it didn't get a lot of publicity since I hadn't even heard about it until now. It looked like it was going to be closer to a Parappa style game than Gitaroo Man, but it still could have been interesting. Oh well. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like Ines have done anything since. Overall, I'd almost classify Gitaroo Man as a legitimate classic of rhythm gaming. I say almost because of my slight niggles with the control aspect of the game, as well as the fact that it really could have used more songs. It's definitely a shining example of how to tell a story in a rhythm game, and the music that's within it is mostly catchy and memorable. People I've spoken to who played this back when it came out remember it fondly, and I was pleased to discover that it wasn't just all rose-tinted nostalgia. Unfortunately, it's one of those rhythm games that has only gone up in value since release, with prices anywhere from $90 to $150 for pre-owned copies of the US release. The PSP version is a bit cheaper, being anywhere from around $30 to $60, and the Japanese PS2 version can be had for around this price as well. Just be careful you don't accidentally purchase the WAN edition. Maybe one day we'll see a PSN release of the PS2 version, or possibly even a remaster, but I wouldn't hold my breath. And you know, it is 2023, so there are ways to play this game that don't involve spending $150. Well, that's all for this episode of Get On Beat. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.